Hi, Zoe Routh here. My question for you this week is, does organizational structure help or hinder corporate culture? Let's find out. On Planet Human this week, something very excited in my favorite topic, brain-computer interfaces. A paralyzed woman has had a brain implant put in on the surface of her brain to interpret her thoughts. Yes, we are getting closer to brain, thought to thought communication. So what does this mean? It means that this little computer chip has been put into her brain to interpret brainwave patterns, muscle functions, etc., that can simulate or stimulate word patterns. So it doesn't read your thoughts exactly. It reads the vocal cord messaging, the muscle twitches, that kind of signal. So they've put that brain computer interface chip on a part of the brain that's responsible for speech and has interpreted the various signals into words. So it signals over to the decoder and decodes the thoughts. This is a game changer for people who are paralyzed, who have lost the ability to speak. So they can still think and communicate. This is massive. And also moving down the track into the future, when we have our little interpretive chips in our brains, we can think to speech to sending it out to the world. It's kind of like typing an email, but better. On Planet Zoe, oh my goodness, Power Games finally launches this week, and here is my beautiful book. This is my fifth nonfiction book, my ninth book overall, and I'm super proud of this book. I think it's going to make a massive difference to leaders in terms of understanding power dynamics in the workplace and how we can use counter moves to deal with the shenanigans that happen, as well as use power responsibly and safely and more positively. And the future of leadership and the future of power is collaborative, which doesn't mean that it's easy, but it does mean that there is a path forward. We don't always have to be the victims of power mongering. And look at this. This is the accompanying workbook, printed workbook that goes with it. It's lovely. I think this is going to be a nice set of tools. You can jump onto the link in the show notes that takes you to the Kickstarter page where you can order the book. And the way that Kickstarter works, it's a crowdsourcing platform. I've set the goal really low at $500. So once we fund, it means the project's going ahead. Well, which is good because I've already written the book, had them printed, produced the audiobook. The thing is ready to go. So all you need to go down is pick the reward tier that you like. And there's lots of great bonuses wrapped into this campaign. Now, the reason I've used Kickstarter is because I could bundle things like a workbook and a hardback copy if you want a special edition hardback copy, as well as my fiction books if you want them, my other previous books, and the special opportunities, especially discounted workshops that I'm offering. One on the 4 spheres of power. You can jump onto that and get the pilot launch price, special price of that. Or if you have a team you want to take through a collaboration workshop, there is my new game called Power Play that you can join as well. There's 3 of those on offer and a few limited, deeply discounted personal consultations where we'll do power mapping with you to look at how you are using power in your organization, what's happening with power in your teams. So that's all on offer. There's plenty of juicy stuff in there. So click the link, join the Kickstarter campaign. The giveaway is still happening until the 26th of May. Everybody who backs gets double entry into the giveaway. If you just want to promote the campaign on social media and tag me in, you will also be entered into the giveaway opportunity, which will be giving away the electronic editions of the book, including the ebook, the audiobook, the workbook, and the 22 worksheets. Phew, that's my life right now, Power Games, and I hope you do enjoy it. So what if and how might we? How might we? What if leaders doubled down on their team and inter-team culture? What do I mean by that? What if we paid specific attention to how our teams run their culture and how our culture between teams actually is working or could work better? How might we make it all work better together? My key strategy, which I outline in, you guessed it, Power Games, is the high-performing team bicycle. And there's 5 elements that for you to keep in mind when you're looking at building a high-performing team and inter-team. The first one is purpose. What's the purpose of your team? And when you can clearly articulate this in a simple sentence, great, you can move on. The second thing is, which is the trailing wheel of the bicycle. So the purpose is your front wheel. The trailing wheel is performance. What are the key results that you are accountable for producing as individuals and as a team collective? What are the things you're trying to generate and create and offer? The three gears, which create the rest of the 5 points to keep in mind, are structure. What's the structure of your team, including who has authority, who has responsibility, how you make decisions, what is the governance structure, how do you manage complaints or issues? Those core structural things are the most important gear in your high performing team bicycle. The second gear is around strengths. Are you leveraging the strengths of each team member so that everybody is getting a sense of progress and development and using the best of their talents and abilities? And the third gear and the fifth point is safety. How are you creating a sense of inclusion, a sense of belonging, as well as a safe space to challenge the status quo, to raise issues, to challenge ideas? That is a core component of your responsibilities as leaders. So that's it. That's how you can start focusing on the culture of your team and inter teams. The same thing applies, whether it's in teams or between teams or indeed across the whole organization. Those 5 key principles are what you need to keep in mind. All right. So that's my handy dandy tips for what if we could do culture better in teams. It's tea time in the office kitchen, and my guest today is Susannah Robinson. Now, she is a lady with plenty of HR experience, a 30-plus year trajectory. She has worked with a number of different organizations. She is the author of Beyond the Boxes. Can't read my own writing. Beyond the Boxes and Lines. Are you ready for the next step? And she really focuses on the future of organizational design, which I think is absolutely fascinating. So we have a great conversation about this. So without further ado, here is Susanna. All right, all the way from Venice, Florida. I had to check which state is Venice in. It's in Florida. Welcome to the show, Susannah Robinson.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time. I'm thrilled to be here.
I am very excited about this topic. I'm not sure how many other people get excited by organizational design, but I certainly do. The
At least the
geometry
two
of
of
it.
us.
Yeah, okay, 2 of us. So that's a good start. So I know people do hold degrees in organizational design. So for the layperson who is not familiar with the technicalities or definition of it, how do we define organizational design?
At a high level, I define it as the structure, the job design, and the employee practices that all work together in a system to support the goals and objectives of the organization.
Okay, so that was the structure, the systems, job
Employee
design.
practices, job design, and
Okay,
structure.
and structure. And customer experience is a big part of that.
It absolutely is. I'm a big believer that customer experience is an output oftentimes of organizational design. If I have people well engaged in understanding their role, how it interacts in the system, what the goals and objectives, the vision, the values of the organization are, the customer experience gets better because of it.
I agree with that totally. So an organization is an ecosystem of different forces and systems.
Absolutely.
So what would prompt a CEO to sit down going, I think I will look at some organizational design today, because it doesn't seem to be front and center on the burning issues that leaders are facing right now. So what might prompt people to start considering these big picture issues?
It isn't always on the front and center. I do hear a lot from CEOs oftentimes. I think I have a structure problem. And oftentimes they don't have a structure problem. Oftentimes they have a job design problem, or they have practices that aren't, employee practices that aren't put in place well to support what they're trying to achieve. Oftentimes I encourage CEOs, anytime something changes in your system, be it your market changes, your business goals and objectives change, someone leaves the organization, that you stop and take a look at the totality of the design. It doesn't have to take forever, but just a quick snapshot of, do we want to continue doing things the way we have always done them, or do we need a shift somewhere?
It's interesting that you mentioned when somebody leaves, because I think my experience working with CEOs, like, somebody else has left, and it's more of a pain in the bum, especially if it
Right.
was an unexpected and an undesirable loss. Sometimes people quit, and you're like, "Yay, good riddance." And if it's not that, and good people are leaving, why that as a prompt to take stock, to stop and take stock? Is it as obvious as I think it is in terms of, is there a culture problem?
I think is there a culture problem? But from my perspective in organizational design, is there a different and better way we can do things to ensure that we fix a culture problem if there is one, become more efficient if it's possible, or simply catapult ourselves to the next step in our ability to meet our strategy, meet our goals, meet our objectives. So it's a good opportunity to stop and say, do I need to simply fill that in kind, or is there a different and better way to do something?
So if we take that as an example, then, like a departing staff member, like the three main things that you talked about, the structure and systems, job descriptions, and employee and customer experience, where would you start with looking at this issue? Like, how would you map it out? How would you reverse engineer it or
Right.
decipher it?
Yeah, typically where I start is in the job design side of it, right? I typically say, okay, talk to me about what that person did and how it interacted with the other components, right? Where were the handoffs? Where are the components that touch the customer experience, that touch other parts of the organization? How did things work within their job in terms of efficiency, effectiveness? Their ability to get their needs met and their ability to meet the needs of the organization. And when you start to talk about the job itself, then you can start to talk about how that job worked within the rest of the ecosystem. And then you can also prod around at, were there things about some of the employee practices that might have caused that person to leave, or that might have made it so that job wasn't as effective as we wanted it to be?
I love doing this because I think a lot of leaders just default to, oh, they had personality clashes with
Yep.
such and such, and just leave it at
Exactly.
that. Can't do anything
Right.
about that. So tell me about your experience with that. You seem to be nodding in agreement.
I am nodding. It's always easier. I love to poke around in things because you find out things you didn't know. I always say when someone leaves the organization, we always take the top off the pot and we go, oh, they did that too. And so you find out things about the role and about how it functioned within the organization that you didn't know when they were there. And I guess I think about it less of let's go on a hunt to see who did who wrong, and more let's go on a hunt to see how we as an organization can get better. Because that one person may have left or several people, but there's a whole bunch of people who are still there. And how do we make it better for them? How do we make the whole system function better? How do we meet our goals more quickly or be able to push our goals to the next level?
Mm. And some of those interaction points, like the handoff points, are friction problems or
Mhm.
competing or codependent activities.
Right.
What are some typical hotspots that you find?
The hotspots we typically find is when someone new comes into the organization, someone else is already doing that role. So now I've got two people doing similar things that are overlapping. And instead of either the supervisor figuring out how that flows or those individuals figuring out, we just continue to do the same things. And so there ends up being this sort of friction between, well, I thought that was my job,
Mm.
as opposed to recognizing there's more than enough work in the organization to go around, and how we divide it up and how we work together is going to be the key to our success. When I teach org design, I always show a video, and you can go out to YouTube to find it. And if you Google, five guys playing one piano, you find the video. There's five guys who play one piano together, and they're playing a typical pop song. And as soon as they start, you recognize the song. And they're each playing a different part of the piano. And then about a third to halfway through, they switch and they move sections. And so they literally pass things off. And I use it as a very good example of where the workflow and the handoffs are in job design. Because when they can work together like that and you can recognize the song, now I know the system's working really well.
I'm just trying to imagine five guys sitting at a piano making that work.
It's they're not even sitting, they're standing around the piano. It's a
Okay.
super fun video. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. I'm definitely Googling that. All right. So we've got a diagnostic opportunity here, starting with the job design piece and looking at how people
Absolutely.
interact and the glitch points where people come into play with each other. How then do we start looking at job design? So it's very easy to pick off all the negative points and the overlaps and stuff.
Mhm.
Do we start from scratch? What do you do next?
I typically don't start from scratch. I typically start from um, understanding what the person in the role was doing and what the objectives are of the organization, and making sure that I understand where they fit in that system. Starting from scratch every time would take a long time. And
Mm.
I think that there are opportunities when practitioners of organizational design make things take a really long time to be able to do simple things. That's where CEOs say, I'm okay. I don't really need to look at this. Whereas if you can move it more quickly, they're willing to engage in that conversation about, okay, let's think about how this person did that role and whether it continues to meet your needs. Because sometimes it's easier to say as the leader when the person is out of the role, well, it didn't exactly do what I thought it was going to do. It's harder to say when there's someone sitting in that seat.
Well, yeah, because it's threatening
It's
to the
threatening, and
individual.
it's and in general, we employ people that we like, right? And we don't want to hurt them, and we don't want to make it feel that what they were doing wasn't valued and what they were doing wasn't appreciated. However, there are times where it's important to step back as the leader and really look at your whole system and say, is the whole system working the way that I need it to work?
So this is like, if you do have people who are sitting in their seats and you're looking at, is this really working for what we need? How do you help them be less fearful and less defensive about risks to their job and embrace the opportunities? Because the opportunity isn't always we're going to get rid of your job. It might be we're going to reshape your job.
Yep,
And
exactly.
how do we do that when people sign up and have contracts to deliver a particular outcome and then you want to change all that? Is it just a question of that technical piece, renegotiating their contract? That's the part one question. Part two is, how do we help them embrace the opportunity?
I think we help them embrace the opportunity by getting them to see this as an opportunity to put their fingerprints on it, right? Nobody knows their role probably better than they do. And if you went and said, "Can you give me 5 ways that you could contribute better to the organization in terms of the role you do and how it should be structured?" They could probably tick them off faster than we could. And so it's oftentimes getting them to recognize that they have an opportunity to influence how their role contributes to the organization,
Mm.
and really how the organization is able to achieve its objectives. And usually, if the organization achieves objectives, people do better within the organization. There are more opportunities for development, there are more opportunities for growth, there's more opportunities for better salaries because the organization is succeeding.
I think that line of sight to the organizational outcomes is really important. And
Absolutely.
the work that I've done with different systems thinkers, and in particular, Stacey Barr, who's a KPI specialist, and she uses systems thinking to draw a results map, which essentially is a process map where you have every function in the organization aiming towards the bullseye, the center point, which is the main objectives of the organization. It's really useful to see the interconnectivity of how each function supports or conflicts with another department or agent,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately leads into the middle. What kind of, do you have something similar, or do you do something similar to help map out the line of sight from the individual in the system to the outcome of the organization?
Yeah, I typically use the structure to give that line of sight, right? So I then transfer from the job design to where that job sits within the structure itself. And oftentimes, when you are able to lay out the structure for people, I gave this advice to a business president the other day. He was trying to redesign the organization, and he had 8 pieces of paper with 8 different org charts on it. I said, I want you to go turn around and stick them up on your wall. Make one big chart. I want you to see the whole thing. And then he was able to say, oh, if I take those pieces out and those pieces out, I can move these things together. I was like, yes, but you cannot see that when you have 8 different pages. And so I will often use the design, the org structure itself to help give that bridge between the job design and what the organization's trying to achieve, because they oftentimes know what the objectives of their leaders are.
So this is looking at, it says in Australia, we call that an org chart, organizational chart,
Yes, we
which
call
is,
it an org chart too.
okay, good. We've got the same language. And typically that's a pyramid type of structure where you have the CEO or board at the top, and then it cascades down into different silos that have interconnectivities. Is that the way that you illustrate it as well, or do you have other ways of illustrating it?
I like some of the new structures as well, right? So there are a lot of new structures out there that are team-based structures, right? Where we say, okay, I've got certain teams that are working on particular projects, and when those projects are done, they go back into the pool and they come out again. I have fairly flat organizations. I have what I call hollow organizations where we go out and we partner with vendors for particular things, or we keep inside the things that are critical competencies to us, and then we go out and we partner with other things, right? I spent a lot of time with my team itself sits as the HR function for a lot of companies. They say, you know, we're small and our critical competency is not human resources. So they come and partner with us, and we just come in and stand up their HR team, and we act as the HR team. And so that's an interesting type of new structure that doesn't always have to be from the top down. So I think there's a lot of different ways to think about it now, which gives a lot of power to organizations that are smaller, maybe not big public companies that can really leverage a lot of the brain power that's out there now that they might not have been able to if they have to hire everyone inside.
So you call that a hollow organization, where, why, I'm not sure why you call it a hollow one. I guess you have, I'm just trying to imagine visually how you draw that. You might have different functions. Let's
You
say
have this one piece that says, here are our critical competencies. Our critical competency is biochemical engineering, right?
Okay.
HR is not a critical competency. So what sits in the middle is, it technically probably isn't hollow, but that's what they're calling it. It sits in the middle is biochemical engineering.
Right.
Finance isn't a critical competency. HR is not a critical competency. Purchasing may not be a critical competency. And so it's determining how your structure really needs to be set up and being able to think and challenge yourself to think a little more creatively about it than a typical top-down pyramid that always exists.
Okay. So for those who are listening to the podcast as opposed to watching on YouTube, what you're describing is like kind of like
my hands move a lot.
No, it's good. Because I think this is really useful for people to visualize, is that in that model, you have like at the centerpiece, you have that main core critical function, core competency, if you like. And then you have, as spokes outside of that, supporting that, you have non-critical functions like HR, if you're using that same example. So it's kind of like a hub and spoke visual. Is that
exactly, that's exactly the visual, and it's determining for your organization and your business, which are the things that you need to retain control of, and which are the things that you want to be able to leverage some of the best talent from around the world, because now we can work just about anywhere in the world with anyone in the world.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. I want to ask you also about this is an ongoing trend, I think, around flattening hierarchies. I'm just going to leave it there and ask you, what do you think about flattening hierarchies?
I'll give you my good HR answer, which is it depends.
Of course, that's a good start.
I think it's very good for some organizations. I think it's very good for some people. And then I think other people struggle in that. There are organizations, when you flatten hierarchies, some organizations I've seen, all they did was just make it flat. And now everyone reports to the CEO, and now he's got a span of control that's 30 people.
Oh my God.
Right. And no one is now getting the support that they need, likely from the CEO with a span of control of 30 people, unless they've redesigned some of the employee practices or some of the processes. It has to go hand in hand with a redesign of process within the organization.
Why do you think it is that some people struggle in flatter hierarchies?
I think that there are people who like to take control of what they do and like to make their own decisions and sort of lead in that space. I think there are other people, the reality is, who want to come and they want to do their role, and they want someone to give them the guidance on doing the role, and they don't necessarily want to take up continuing to grow in that space or directing themselves in that space.
Interesting. And so the way that you describe that, flattened hierarchy where you have 30 direct reports to a CEO. So the idea behind flattening hierarchies is to have more inclusive, collaborative approach. Yes. But in that example, 30 direct reports, it almost becomes a tyranny in some regards.
Mm-hmm.
where the CEO dictates and everybody else just does,
Right.
depending on how they've redesigned their systems.
And if they've sort of shifted their culture, right? I think that if you're going to flatten the hierarchy, you do need to shift the culture to the understanding and the expectation that we're going to work together more. We're going to work more in teams. We're going to be more inclusive in this space. And if you have not shifted the culture that way or given that set of understanding, I think it's harder for people who've been in a stacked organization to then shift to that.
That's a really interesting observation too. So how do you actually assist your organization, your people, to move from hierarchical to teams-based environment where collaboration and cooperation is the default? Are there specific things that you would encourage leaders to address in that culture change?
I would encourage them to address a couple of things. One is the tools and making sure people have the tools to be able to do it, whether they're all sitting in an office together or whether they are in different parts of the country or different parts of the world, making sure they have the collaboration, project management tools to be able to accomplish what you want them to accomplish. I would say the other thing that needs to be looked at from an employee practice perspective is how are we incenting people? If we are saying we would like them to work more in teams, but we're continuing to incent them as individuals
Mm.
and not incenting the team components, this is where employee practices are a big piece of organizational design because you will have the unintended consequence of someone continuing to shift back to being an individual contributor as opposed to seeing their success as part of the team.
Yeah, I see that one quite a lot too. Like, oh, we're not
Mm-hmm.
going to work collaboratively, but they're rewarded by being lone
Yes.
wolves. So
Right.
they're never going to work. So that's one barrier to collaboration is having the incentivization set up to go against collaboration. So we've got all right. I'm just trying. All my questions are bubbling out at once. So switching staff culture to team space, we have tools and we have incentivization. Is there anything else that to go along with that leaders need to take into account?
I would say the one thing they need to take into account is the talent and the willingness and interest of the people to be part of that team.
Whoa. Okay. Yeah, that's a kind of a big one.
Yeah,
Willingness to
it is a
shift.
big one. It's interesting. I do a lot of work with predictive index and building teams that balance one another and
Mhm.
how that looks from a team perspective. And oftentimes it's a piece that we forget when we put teams together is putting teams together who have particular competencies and skills and people who are interested in being part of that team.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece to take into consideration. So you can have all the other great systems and resources in place, and then somebody doesn't want to play, then you
That's
got
right.
problems.
Right.
So that's obviously a barrier to collaboration, as is not having the right tools, as is not having the right incentives. Are there any other barriers to collaboration that you've seen in your work, Susanna?
Once I can usually get people once we've cleared those and we can get people to think about talking with one another where they're focused on their impact on each other versus their intention, right? So they're speaking from trying to, as opposed to trying to be understood, to trying to understand, things will move more smoothly. But I think that that is a big component of leadership, not simply for the top leader, but for everyone. Now, when you put teams together, you're asking a lot more people to be leaders within the organization and
Mm.
helping them think about what their impact is on others and coming from that perspective. If we can train and develop people's leadership skills to do that, it tends to be a lot smoother. And they come from a perspective of saying, I didn't really think about it that way. I didn't mean it that way.
Yeah, and that doesn't really help. I didn't mean to
Doesn't
smack you
help
in the
unless
head.
they're willing to think about it.
Yeah. Okay. It's like sometimes intention doesn't matter because the impact is so
A hundred
huge.
percent agree.
Yeah. I
And
think,
the higher you move in leadership, the less your intention matters to the people who work on your team
yeah, that's right.
because they assume that your intention and your impact are the same.
Or that you should know better.
That too.
Absolutely. I'm curious when we're talking about processes, organizational design, job design, if you've seen any structures or processes that lead to worsening office politics or power games. So I've got my next book coming out in a month or so called Power Games, and I'm obsessed with this idea of how organizational
Yep.
structures can potentially go against harmonious interactions. What have you seen, Susanna, in terms of designs that foster unwittingly office politics?
I think the one design that I see that does that quite a bit is a true matrix organization where someone has a reporting structure within a division or a region and a reporting structure within a function, and where the leader of either the region, division, or the function doesn't see it as their role to work with the other. And you create this sort of triangle within the organization where the employee is trying to work their way between the two.
Yeah.
And you watch this jockeying for position within the organization. So to me, a true matrix organization that's not implemented well really can amp up the office politics quite a bit.
Wow, that's interesting. So you might have bosses struggling for their resources. Like, no, I had John for, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's like, no, I had John for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
Exactly.
as an
Or we've
example
just
of,
got John doing twice as much work because the two bosses haven't aligned on what John's body of work should actually be.
right. And if you're a boss, you probably want autonomy or control over your human resources and assets. And having to share isn't always fun, even though we've moved
Right.
past being a 2-year-old.
Exactly. Yes,
Mm,
exactly.
mm. And sometimes that's also linked into, as you mentioned earlier, Susanna, the incentivization plan. So if the bosses are incentivized by group delivery, they don't want to share their team members because that's how they get compensated potentially.
Exactly.
Mm,
Exactly.
okay. All right. Are you ready for the fast three?
I'm ready.
Okay. Let's do it. Number one, what is the future technology you most want right now?
Well, I've always wanted the same technology, which doesn't exist, and hopefully it will, is I would love to be able to blink myself places because I think that would make my life much easier to go from place to place.
Just blink or knock your heels together.
Just blink and nod, and I will get to where I need to be, and it will save my commuting time a lot.
Awesome. Number two, best tip for leadership.
Think about your impact, manage your impact, manage your impact.
I love it. And what are you reading or listening to right now?
I'm actually rereading. I'm rereading The Science of Dream Teams, which was written by the people who put predictive index into place.
Science of what did you say?
Science of Dream Teams.
Science of Dream Teams. Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
it's right, written by Mike Zani, and he's the CEO of Predictive Index.
Awesome. I will look that one up. That was fantastic. Well, that was the fast three.
I loved it. That's a great one.
It was very fast. Okay. I do have a question here that I didn't get to earlier is what do you do when you have employees who are stonewalling? Because I've had this conversation with a client recently. They have somebody who is deliberately stonewalling, refusing direction from her and also from her colleagues. Like simple
Mhm.
things like please do an administrative process so it makes it easier for us to have access to that data around that client. No, just don't
No.
do it. So, what is your approach to dealing with that?
Typically my approach is I try to make sure that the leaders are willing to have the really uncomfortable conversation is just be uncomfortable for a bit and recognize that it needs to get out there that it's not acceptable for this to happen, right? It's not acceptable to not be part of the organization in this way. And then there comes a place where I need to understand whether this is actually the role the employee wants or not, if they're not willing to do this. And so I think those tend to be two fairly uncomfortable conversations that sometimes we dance around as opposed to really having the conversation that says, look, when I ask you to do it and you tell me no, I'm trying to understand why. I'm going to seek to understand first,
Mm.
but then I'm going to let you know that it's not going to be acceptable to not do it. And now I need to try to understand whether this is really the role you want or not.
And that's presumably after you've done all the work saying, oh, let's have a look at the system or the process.
That's
Like, is
right.
the system
Yes.
or
Once we've
process?
realized it's not us.
Yeah. I was like, is the system or process prohibitive and stupid or
Right.
whatever? And once you realize,
Yes.
no, it's necessary and essential, then it's like, okay, are you the right fit for this
Yeah.
job? Do you want to be here? Okay. Tough conversations. Fabulous.
It's a tough conversation, but I think we need to make sure that we've also asked the questions about what's creating the problem first too. I'm assuming that we've sort of gotten to that space in this part when we're where we're stonewalling, is we've actually asked what's creating the problem.
Great. Thank you. Susanna, is there a question I haven't asked that you'd love to answer?
I don't think so. I love to talk about this stuff. So to me, it's great fun. It's really great fun.
Oh, wait, I agree. I'm having a ball. So I think that's good. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights about organizational design and job design and employee experience, all meshing together to create better places to work, I'm hoping.
Absolutely.
Where can people find out more about you and the work that you do?
Sure. They can go to our website, which is www.partnershipfortalent, all one word, .com, or they can actually buy the book, which is called Beyond the Boxes and Lines, and it's available on Amazon and on our website.
Yeah, and the book is really great. So shout out for the book. It's a very helpful little resource. Susanna, thank you.
It's a
That has been
quick
terrific.
resource.
It is a quick resource, very handy, very detailed, very pragmatic and practical. Thank you so much. It's been awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate the time very much.
On Read to Lead this week, my favorite book on culture, and it is Culture Eats Strategy for Lunch. Culture Eats Strategy for Lunch. And it is by Kurt Kaufman and Kathy Sorensen. I've been recommending this book for, I don't know, 15 years maybe, and I just can't go past it. I highlighted pretty much almost every page the first time I read it. I learned so much about culture in teams within this book, including the really important idea of bridge cultures, what happens in relationships between teams in an organization. And in organizations which have a matrix design where office politics can really get derailed, this is especially important. So that's my recommendation for this week on Read to Lead. That's it for me this week and for the show this week. My big reminder is that the Kickstarter, the release of my latest book, Power Games, A Leader's Guide to Office Politics and Drama-Free Collaboration, is live now. And you have the opportunity by becoming a backer to get 2 entries into the giveaway, which will give you, if you win, the whole digital bundle, which includes the ebook, the audiobook, the workbook, and the 22 worksheets and checklists and self-guides, tip sheets. There's quite a lot packed into that. All right. And while the link is in the show notes, I do hope you join us as a backer, or if you don't want to back, please just promote it, because you can also gain entry into the giveaway that way. In the meantime, live with grace, lead in service, live well, lead well.